Welcome, welcome. This is Newfoundland and Labrador Studies 2205. I'm Miss Fleming, and this is Section 1, Lesson 3 from our first unit on culture, expressions of culture and the history of photography. This is Video 1. Let's first talk about cultural expressions. The most prominent way people express their culture is through the arts. People create music, write songs, tell stories through theater, television, and film, and create visual art through different mediums as expressions of their culture and identity. Many of our sayings, stories, art, and other expressions are inspired by the sea and coastline, which will be discussed in our next section on culture and geography. But I wanted to do a particular lesson with you on photography, because throughout this unit, we will also be focusing on photography as a visual art medium and a tool for social sciences. We might think of photography in a very casual way, because we use it so much now to take photos of what we're doing and of our friends, but photography is an excellent tool for social sciences and a wonderful way that we can express ourselves. So, I'm going to start with a brief history of photography. To the best of my ability, I condensed it down as much as I could to give you the tops of the trees, so to speak. So, technically, the first camera was invented in ancient Egypt, where light entered through a tiny hole inside a darkened room and was then projecting an image on the opposite wall of the outside. And this projected image was absolutely perfect, but it was upside down. I found this wild because I'd never realized until I actually started doing research for this course back when I first started teaching it, that photography went all the way back to ancient Egypt. I had heard of the concept of camera obscuras, which we'll talk about in more detail, but I didn't realize that it went back this far. And ancient Egypt wasn't even the first example, because the inventor of this particular camera wrote in 1000 CE that he didn't invent the concept, as the phenomenon was demonstrated in ancient Greece and ancient China over 1500 years even before that. So photography has been around for such a long time. So I mentioned camera obscuras. So that's what these rooms were called. And they were used through then history, usually by the rich and affluent people in a particular culture, as like toys or entertainment. But they were also used as tools for visual artists to help them create their artwork until 1727. And that is when a professor, his name was Joseph Niepce, and he accidentally left a flask of chalk, nitric acid, and silver, and it got exposed to sunlight. And what happened was interesting. He observed that the side of the flask that had been exposed to the sunlight had become very dark. He then began experimenting, because he thought it was an interesting concept, by blocking the sun with stencils. And he thus captured the first what we call light images. It wasn't until 100 years later, in 1827, when the first image was captured in a camera obscura, but it took 8 hours to develop. Our photographs now develop almost instantly. You press a button on your phone or your camera and it's there. This took 8 hours. The next major development in photography was by Louis Daguerre, who was a student of Niepce, actually, and he figured out how to preserve the image by inventing what became called the daguerreotype in 1839. And these earliest photographs were silver-plated copper sheets, okay? And they were then coated in iodine. These took 10 minutes to be exposed, rather than the 8 hours. And then the plate had to be immediately soaked in silver chloride to preserve the image. This photograph I have here is of a person holding up two daguerreotypes, so you could see what they looked like. A little bit different than what we would see even in more modern black and white photography. And through the following decades, various innovations, like using paper and tin or glass plate negatives, changed photography. And dry glass plates could then be stored for development in a darkroom at a later date instead of being immediately needed to be developed. And this allowed for the first handheld cameras to be mobile, that you could take them different places. But this concept of it having to be 10 minutes to expose the image on these plates really made me realize, something that had maybe, weirded me out a little bit, that might also have made you feel the same way. When you look at really old photographs of people, sometimes their eyes don't really look natural. And this is because of the 10 minutes it took for these images to be exposed onto the plates. Someone had to stand perfectly still for 10 minutes. But one thing you can't stop for 10 minutes is blinking. And so because of that movement of blinking, made people's eyes look unnatural. So while it might freak us out a little bit, once you know why it occurred, it makes it a bit easier to understand. Okay, so I'm going to ask you now to continue to the next video where I highlight early photography in Newfoundland and Labrador specifically. But before you do that, make sure you take a break, stretch if you need it, rest your eyes, and then I'll see you in the next one.